everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to welcome Christy Manetta to our webinar series. We have such an interesting conversation today. We know we will be speaking to many of you either facing divorce or in the process of a divorce and looking at how it will or potentially will impact your future career and what choices you make as you design your new life. So thank you so much, Christy, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'd like to give just a little bio about Christy. Most of what we'll be talking about, we'll want to hear directly from Christy. But I will tell you that Christy is a real estate agent. She is with Keller Williams. And for Christy, she helps both first-time homeowners as well as experienced real estate owners find the perfect house for them as they reignite their lives. Christy blends her personal experiences with professional expertise to ensure that her clients feel empowered in every stage of the journey. Christy is deeply committed to elevating the real estate profession through her leadership and active involvement in the Bucks County Association of Realtors and the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. She is also the 2025 President-elect of the Bucks County Association of Realtors and an appointed member of the Board of Directors for the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. Christy returned to the workforce just shortly before and then flourished after her divorce. And when we look at her list of accomplishments, I'm sure you can understand why we asked Christy to join us to talk about the struggle, but also the reward of returning to the workforce after a divorce. Christy was married for 29 years. She is the mother of 3 children and 1 grandchild. Congratulations. She was married at 21 years old, and while she completed college and she worked a few years before having children, it was her intention and her family's intention that they would raise the children with Christy at home. Christy worked within the household throughout the marriage and then entered and re-entered the workforce shortly before her divorce, working full-time at the end of 2018. Along the way, Christy found inspiration and overcame obstacles that allowed her to not only find and return to the workforce, but to build a flourishing, impressive career. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you very much.
It's always so funny to have someone read a bio about you. So I'd love to ask you, tell us about your story. Tell us how you started in your real estate career.
Thank you. First of all, Jennifer, thank you so much for inviting me today and for that really gracious introduction. It is interesting to hear someone tell a little bit of the story that I know that I've lived, but to hear it from somebody else, sometimes when you're in it, it's overwhelming in a good way and empowering. And it makes me feel like, wow, I've done it. I've done it.
You sure have.
Thank you. Thank you. So as you mentioned in the bio, I really had the great opportunity to stay home with my kids and wouldn't change that at all. It did, however, make it a little bit more complicated to then decide when I learned and made that decision that the marriage was not something that I was willing to stay in. It made it a little bit trickier then to find what I was going to do because I realized I had to become independent. I had to provide for myself, provide for my children, as they all say, put a roof over my head and food on the table. And that complicated it a little bit. I had along the way, when I started to get back into the workforce a little bit part-time, I actually fell into the home inspection industry, which was kind of by chance and not something that I ever saw happening. But my neighbors owned a home inspection company and approached me and asked me to take over their marketing. And I thought that sounded like fun and was something different. And it really opened my eyes to a world of real estate that was very exciting and helped me learn that I could blend my background in education and my desire to help people into maybe something else. And so I stayed in the home inspection industry for a couple of years. And then when that company moved out of state, I had the decision to make of, what do I do now? I think that we all have that
Yes.
moment a couple times in our life, right? Where we go, okay, what do I do now? And it was then that I decided to get my real estate license, like you mentioned, at the end of 2018, and really start on the journey of getting really not even back to work, getting to work full time and truly providing and becoming independent for myself.
That question of what do I do now? You're right. We encounter that so many times in our lives, and it's so terrifying when the whole future is unknown. And my clients talk so much about that through the divorce journey, because what is next? And I think what's so wonderful about the journey that you gifted yourself, because you had to say, I don't know what's next, and I'm going to figure it out. And that's so brave. It's so hard to start over with a clean canvas and then paint what comes next, except there's also such a beauty in that, because it's one of the few times in our lives we actually get to design what life is next if we take advantage of that opportunity. Life sort of happens to most of us throughout it. And I love that you didn't focus on the fear of that, but you focused on the I need to
Well,
do.
there were moments
I bet.
where
Let's talk about them.
it was pretty fearful and fraught with some anxiety. I I didn't know. I wanted to make a plan, and I wanted to seek independence, and I wanted to be able to provide for my kids in a way that I had not been able to provide before. I had been able to help them through so many things and be home with them and be their mom, really and truly be their mom. And like I said, I wouldn't trade that for the world. But that piece of financial security for them was something that had never come from me. So that provided some anxiety. And I think whether you have children or not, having to step outside of that space and learn what life looks like on your own, it can be a heavy burden, and yet can truly also be so beautiful. I think one of the things that was so important for me to remind myself along the way was that it's a process and it's okay. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe, certainly when I will never forget when I passed my test and got my license.
Oh,
Um, it was such a moment. To some folks, it might seem like, oh, that's exciting. You passed a test. Great. We all did that in high school. I did this
no.
in my mid 40s, and it felt like the first thing that I had really done for myself.
Oh,
And
that's
it felt like the step in a direction that, even though I didn't know exactly where it was going in a positive direction. And that was, I sat in my car and I just, had that moment of like, wow, I really did it. And okay, so now
incredible.
what's next?
Just incredible. And if you don't mind focusing a little bit on some of that fear, because I think that's a universal part of the universal emotion of going through
Mm.
divorce generally, let alone the emotional and the financial and just the physical unknowns of what will be. How did you power through that? Because you clearly did. How did you power through that? What did you find inspiration in that made that fear a little more conquerable?
It it was truly it was truly sometimes a day by day thing. When I experienced the loss of my mom several years ago, I remember her friend saying I remember calling her one day and, literally from my bed and saying, I don't know how to do this without my mom. And she said something in that moment that was so dear because it was coming from my mom's friend and best friend. And it felt like it was truly coming from my mom. And she said, you today, right now, just need to get up, put your feet over the side of the bed, put your feet on the floor, and take one step.
Oh,
And it makes me a little bit teary, even thinking about that right now. But that she said that to me over 20 years ago. And that still, I can put myself in that situation and still feel that to this day. And so through that process, of, even through the excitement and the joy and the wonder of creating a new path for myself, when that fear came in, I leaned really heavy on those words. And I just reminded myself, okay, today, the first thing you're going to do is sit up in bed, put your feet over the side of the bed, and put your foot on the floor and take one step. And at the end of the day, because some days those steps went awry and everything went a little bit wrong, at the end of the day, I kind of reversed it and thought, okay, now it's time to get in bed and know that tomorrow is a new day and start again. And it sounds sometimes a little bit cliche and a little bit of a pat answer, but it's so true. It really just is leaning into that hope that something else, something better is coming because you're working on something and you're making positive strides in your life.
We, Chrissy, it's beautiful because we were just at the Pennsylvania Conference for Women, and Mel Robbins was one of the keynote speakers, and
Mm-hmm.
she shared some times she had gone through and how to get through it. It's a long story that I think we should all read the book. It was just a fascinating speech. She was very funny and inspirational because she said ultimately it was this countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, do it. And
Yeah.
it seems so simple, but it's not. It's monumental to be able to say to yourself, I don't want to do this, or I'm afraid I can't do this, or everything's stacked against my doing this. But to do that, to put your feet down and say, I'm doing it, to overcome that, it's really incredible.
And I will say too, Jennifer, a really important piece of the whole process and dealing with that fear and anxiety was therapy. I did have two therapists along the way that helped me, and I made sure that my kids had some therapy as well, because it's important to, I believe, it's important to acknowledge that fear and acknowledge that anxiety, because the more you push it off, in the beginning, when I saw the fear, felt the anxiety coming, I kind of pushed it off. And, I did that thing of shoving it in a bag and thinking, I'm just going to shove it aside. That's not helpful. And so the more that I learned through therapy and the more that I acknowledged it and said, you know what, today it is a scary day. I am afraid. It's as simple as that. I am afraid. That actually was helpful. It was helpful to acknowledge it and to help me to move forward.
And that's such an important distinction too, between pretending the fear is not there and trying to do things, and acknowledging it's there and saying, I just have to put my feet down and do it. And there's an empowerment to acknowledging the fear and forcing yourself through it that's different
Yeah.
than quieting it. And I love that you enhanced that experience with therapy. I wish in the family court system we had therapists that came along the ride, because you go through so many waves of grief and fear and exhilaration and then fear, and it just circles constantly. So to have someone to guide you through that, not just your lawyer, but a therapist to
Hmm.
help, it's so important. And I think it's
And
wonderful.
I appreciate the fact that you just used the term grief, because through the whole process, there are so many layers of grief, and we can touch on this as we go through, but even at the end, even if you know that this is something that should happen and is the right path for everyone, there still is a level of grief. I found myself, even at the end of it all, when I received my papers in the mail, it there was a different level of grief than that I knew or was ready to really acknowledge for a moment, because you're working towards this end point, and that's where you need to be, and yet there still comes grief with that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so important for people to understand that those levels of grief, they're going to kind of come and go, and just like the fear and the anxiety, it's so important to acknowledge that and say, okay, I am feeling sad and I'm feeling grief about this, and work through that.
Christy, I think everyone who goes through a divorce has such grief, but you also faced an extraordinary circumstance in your journey too. And if you would be open to sharing that, I think I will just start by saying I follow you professionally. You have an amazing podcast, Killing It in Real Estate, and you also during some trying times wrote posts that brought me to tears in a heartfelt, inspirational way. And if we talked before, and you expressed the willingness to share some of what you had been through during this process, and I opened the door with that because I know how inspirational this is.
Thank you. Yes. So as we talked about, I started laying the plans in 2018, but even a little bit earlier, the divorce process was all such a long process, and coming to the realization was a long process, but I really started to lay those plans in 2018 and was motoring along and was really proud of myself, was getting my feet on the ground. And well, then we all know the pandemic hit, 2020 came. And so for those in real estate, we actually were shut down for about 2 months. We could not do business until things changed, at the state level in government. And then I was able to get back to business, and again was moving along, um, becoming becoming successful and finding a little bit of success on my own. And then at the end of 2021, when I was still married and living in the house with my then husband, he suffered a life-changing medical event right in front of me. And if I can be really frank, there were two immediate gut reactions. The first was, oh my gosh, my kids. What am I going to do in this situation to help my children and to help him? It was a very basic human instinct of just how am I going to help? And then, really surprisingly, there was also this thought of, are you kidding me? What am I going to do? I had started this plan and I have gotten this far. And now, back to that, now what? Now what? I, at that point, had to stop work for several months. He required very intensive care. And even when he came home after almost 3 months in the hospital, I had to stay home and become a caregiver. And becoming a caregiver, regardless of who it is for, absolutely regardless of who it is for, is very difficult. And I probably was not meant to be a 24-hour caregiver. I find people that are in home health and doctors and nurses,
Yes.
they are so, so gifted and so talented and have hearts of gold. It is a trying and difficult time. And so I found myself for a very large portion of 2022 being at home and being a caregiver for 24 hours a day, while also navigating a divorce. And that was, I think, you alluded to some of the posts that I wrote, and I think a lot of that was selfishly for me. I felt so trapped in my home and trapped in my brain sometimes of this plan that I had laid and these ideas that I needed to happen. And yet here I was at home caring for someone who I was ultimately divorcing. It was like nothing that I could have ever imagined would have happened. And I think our journey in divorce, everyone's is so unique. And that can look like, it's not, a lot of times it's not from point A to point B. And because life is still happening along the way, whether it's, someone in your home having a life-altering medical event, whether it's losing a parent, your kids are going to college, there's so many different things, so many pieces of life that are still in motion. And I'll tell you, they are setbacks. They really are. But you've got to just keep going. And there were definitely moments, especially I when I was able to get back to work, I had to go back as I couldn't do it. I couldn't do sales. I was very thankfully still able to stay in the real estate industry. But I went to an hourly position at first in real estate just to keep my foot in the door and bring some income into the home so that there was a time where I was literally working to pay someone else to come into the home just so that I could get
Wow.
out and continue my journey. It was hard. It was very, very difficult, but we kept forward and we moved forward. And at at the end of 2022, things were able to move forward, and I was able to get back to work full time.
It's just it's just this. I always lose words when I would even read your post. The intensity of everything happening at once, which is something I know my clients face often. Something
Yeah.
happens in the middle of the divorce, or like you said, a death of a parent, the loss of a job. For those returning
Mm.
to the workforce, maybe losing funds from a spouse who stops supporting the family. There are these catastrophic events that can just enhance all that grieving. And when you think the pandemic and being locked in, and you said I felt trapped, and I think that feeling of being trapped, the exact
Mm.
opposite of the feeling of independence, there is an in between. And it seems somehow through that you found an in between to keep pushing off into independence, because independence is a full-time job. Keeping it, finding it, enjoying it, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And to have that setback, because it was such a significant setback, I am astonished. I was then, and I remain astonished at how you took from that something, that motivation to push you forward into real true independence.
Thank you. It was hard. And I think it's important to also acknowledge that some of the changes of life that happen during a divorce, and this can be hard to hear, but it's the truth, is the loss of friendships as well. That was an experience that I didn't know was a possibility. I thought that I was, please don't mistake me, I was very well supported with friendships and family. But there are people sometimes that just don't see your life the way that you are living it, and they don't quite understand. And so that's part of the change as well. And that's hard. That's another piece of the feeling trapped and feeling like you're sometimes doing it all on your own. But I want to say, as you power through and move to the other side, a lot of times those friendships will come back and people will understand, and people will see you in a different light and will understand a little bit better.
I imagine somewhere along the line you had to protect against the feelings of having lost those friendships, or identifying with this new self you're delivering to the world. And I wonder, how did you do that? How did you find, here is who I am now. This is who I'm going to be. How did you find that strength to do that, in the face of objections from other people?
Similar to the experience that I had with calling my mom's friend, I had another experience a couple months into being a caregiver, and I was on the phone with a very dear friend and said the words, "The only things that are keeping me on this earth are my faith in my kids."
Oh,
And that, like, I think I felt that, but when I heard myself say it, I thought, oh my gosh, wow, you need a lot of help. And I realized at that time I was living in some dark times. What I did with that was I really sat on that statement. And I took that then and thought, instead of that being what's keeping me here, that's what's motivating me. That's what's pushing me forward.
Incredible.
Because I knew that the right thing was to continue forward, regardless of all the noise around me and regardless of all the things that were happening. Every single day, it was going to be important for me to pick a positive and to find something to move forward, because my kids are that important, because I'm that important, and because my faith was moving me that in that direction. So those are really the two things at the very, very basic level of it. Um, and then and then there was this piece too of being really proud of myself that I had never, in full transparency, had ever felt.
Wow.
I had felt proud of things I did, really, really proud of my kids, really proud of my family. But that deep, deep, deep sense of, wow, you did it, kid. You,
Incredible.
that was another motivating factor of just can, keeping that and feeling that, because it feels great.
When did you feel that? What was the moment for you, or what was the experience for you where you thought, that's it, you did it, kid?
It's come in a couple of different waves. Um, I think the most, and I shared this with you yesterday, the biggest moment recently for me of just wow, I've done it, is when I got my license in real estate at the end of 2018. The purpose was to gain independence, and that looked like, to me, I said to myself, if you get your real estate license and are successful enough, one day you can buy a car in your own name, and it's going to be great. And that's going to be your path. That's going to be what, that to me was like symbolic of being able to drive on my own journey, right? And
I love
I just instead I just bought myself a house.
it.
And
I love
I,
that.
this morning I was making my bed and I looked at the bed and I thought, I just made a bed with all the pillows I want to have on the bed in my house.
Incredible.
And it just was the most amazing, amazing feeling. The most amazing feeling.
Because the journey's been fairly short, Christy. When we look at the years that you're talking about, the journey is fairly short, and yet it's just a rocket. It has been a rocket. So despite the setbacks, and despite the obstacles and the darkness that comes along the way, carrying through took you to this wonderful, achieved, emotionally and financially satisfying career. When you entered into that career initially, I'll just walk us back a little, because I wonder, what was it like for you to enter into the workforce having been out full time for a while? How did you overcome what all of my clients report is just a sensitivity to what other people have experienced versus what
Mm,
they have in the professional workforce? And a lot of times my clients will say, I started the job, but I felt overwhelmed. How
mhm.
how did you get through those stages? And also, what were those stages? What did you experience?
There was, that's a great question. There was definitely a I'm new here feeling. I felt like the new kid in school. I felt like I was learning a whole new language. I had I felt like, I spent all these years with my kids and I was so entrenched in their lives. It was like I had to learn how to interact with other adults. I know
Yeah,
that sounds a little bit,
not at all.
a little bit silly, but it was like, gosh, I kind of wish there was a class I could have taken to teach me how to sit in a meeting, how to be with clients. Because even when you're taking your courses to pass the real estate exam, it's not actually teaching you how to run a business.
Of course.
It's not really teaching you how to do a transaction. So there was a good portion of time where I felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb, like everybody knew I was new. And so I leaned into it. I was new. And I was, if I made mistakes, I admitted to the mistakes. And I think too, one of the things I learned was to ask questions because
Gotcha.
I thought, you know what? I don't I don't want to just be figuring this out on my own. I'm going to start asking questions. And if people look at me like, wow, this lady asks a lot of questions, well, it's because I'm new here. So cut me a break. I'm trying to figure
Absolutely.
things out. So I would say there was definitely a good portion of time that I felt like the new kid in school. And then I started to really, get my footing and feel more confident. And then through the ups and downs, it's interesting because even though that event was devastating in so many ways, it actually gave me the opportunity to learn so much more. Um, I this sounds very basic but I learned more about healthcare than I had ever understood. I learned a lot about health insurance. I had been very fortunate to not have to that I had health insurance, but I just didn't know all the ins and outs. And so now I had a chance to learn that.
Absolutely.
Um,
Unfortunately, but absolutely.
yes, yes. And so it just became a time where there was a lot of devastation to it, but also in order to move forward, I had to turn it into a learning experience. And I also shared with you that just a few days into it, I needed to shape that into an experience where if I could help anyone through it, through whether it was something similar or just some type of event in their life, that's what I was going to do. And so that would be the next stage of it of was like, I'm learning, but I'm also learning to maybe help somebody else along the way.
Christy, when we spoke about that feeling you had about wanting to help people, one of the things you said to me is that that feeling came to you sitting in the waiting room of the hospital. And so in the middle of the chaos that you were experiencing and then comforting your children and finding your way in your independence route to also just instinctually have this desire to want to share what you were going through in order to help other people. It's truly remarkable and really reflective of what I know about you. And I think your idea of a class to help people returning to the workforce gain the skills that they need and to have it in a safe space. It's such
Mm.
a critical way to give back. And I am suggesting that you run that class because it would be fantastic. So
We can start with the very basics.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that you're willing to give back and answer those questions after you were the person asking the
Mm.
questions. And feeding back, I think, for everyone going through a divorce, sharing that experience, knowing that there are people who want to help them because they survived
Yes.
the divorce process too. Finding each other and being there to help grow through the process and heal through the process because we
Hmm.
heal from the broken relationship. We heal from the life that didn't end up the way we thought it would. And we heal from that grief. And you are such an amazing example of someone who went through each of those steps and is now giving back to other people going through that, and not least of which through this webinar that we will we have a wonderful attendance today, and we will be posting the webinar on our website to share with other
Great.
people who are in either the investigative period of their divorce or in the middle of those dark times where they're trying to cling to those things that are motivating them to make it through. This is a universal message for what everyone goes through.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Thank you. I'm so glad that it can live on. And I love that, that thought of the investigative stage. I think I when I was thinking about it and starting to put the wheels in motion, that was really something that I feel like I was missing. And I think that if there was something I back to what you said about sitting in the hospital, I remember saying, "If someone would just tell me what to do, I'll do it. No problem." And so that's kind of where I am. I had to flip that. Okay, so no one's gonna tell me what to do in this situation, so maybe learn all the things you can so that you can help somebody along the way. And the same with investigating and thinking about, is divorce an option for me? What does that look like? What's the process look like? What happens when things go off the rails? I love that it will be available for people to learn.
Thank you. Thank you for being part of this,
Thank
giving
you.
us your time today. We welcome questions. We can read those questions to Christy if you have any questions. And just to conclude, Christy, I wonder, is there direct advice that you would give if a friend comes to you and says, I'm thinking about getting a divorce? And actually we have a question. So let me ask this first. How do you rebuild your confidence after that
Mm.
major life change that you had with your husband and then return to the workforce? So how did you build that confidence?
That is a really great question, and I don't know that there's one simple answer to that. Um, it's pretty multi-layered, and I think a lot of us come to the end of a marriage with varying levels of confidence. It will look very different for all of us. For myself, I can honestly say that my confidence has grown in ways I didn't know possible through this. Um, it was really just a lot of it came from just reminding myself, this is what you've got to do. You can do this. And then finding those little things of like one piece to that was when I've got my own first credit card in my own name. That was nothing that I ever had in my marriage. And then that piece of when I opened my own bank account, those were all little pieces of confidence builders building up one on top of another. And there are still moments where I struggle and I think, what am I doing? But I go back to that. I'm just new here. Somebody help me out. Somebody point me in the right direction. And I ask a couple questions and then I get back to being my confident self.
I love that. I love that. I'm new here applies to everything
Yeah.
because it does. It does.
Yeah. Yeah.
On a lot of times my clients will say to me when we're dividing assets or they're trying to figure out where the assets are, because for some
Hmm.
of my clients, they have absolutely no idea what bank accounts there are, where there are retirement accounts. Well, sometimes I wonder if you experience this or you said it to your lawyer, but clients will say to me, I don't know how I got here. This
Hmm.
wasn't our plan. This wasn't what I thought that I would do, that I wouldn't have a bank account, that I wouldn't know. And I say the same thing all the time. In a marriage, we just kind of intuitively move into roles that are easier for us, one way or the other, whether someone's financial or physical or whatever the household
Hmm.
roles are. And so, if you don't mind, if I ask you, how did you feel about that? Because this is a common question from my clients.
I felt really lost. Like I said, I had never had my own credit card. I had never had my own bank account in my name. And I acknowledged the fact that a lot of it was shoved on me with the medical event quicker than I would have cared for. But I felt pretty lost. I didn't know what was out there. I was relying on a lot of trust. I had to learn along the way that I had to look for some things. Um, I definitely didn't know what the retirement accounts were. I didn't know, like I said a couple minutes ago, I didn't even really know anything about the insurance that we had.
Well,
So it was very important for me to ask family, ask friends, ask my attorney, um, do some of the old Googling, you know, do some investigative work. But that's I think about that and I think, if someone was coming to me kind of on the flip side and as a young woman or young man and saying, I want to get married, what should I do? I would say, well, it's important for you to know X, Y, and Z, a lot about banking and finances. And I think there is a lot of beauty in being with somebody who wants to take care of you, but I think there's also a lot of beauty in being knowledgeable to be able to take care of yourself as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
I thank everyone who joined us today. We are so happy to have had you here and in whatever step of the journey you're on in terms of your divorce process, whether investigative or in the middle of those darker times. Attorneys, friends, colleagues, real estate agents that you may be fortunate enough to meet in your journey. All of the people around you, most of them have been through a divorce or they have loved somebody who has gone through a divorce. That's a great majority of people, either having loved someone suffering through the process and helping guide them or having gone through it themselves. And that openness, and Christy, your openness in both talking to us today, but also reaching out to people when you had questions, asking those questions and saying, I'm just new here. Let's move on. Let's get this done. I really appreciate that. And I know I speak for our audience also in appreciating that, because it also shines a light and lets people know through the dark times that they're not alone. And that is so critical. At our law firm, we truly connect with our clients. We try to very much connect with our clients so they know they're never alone, that there's a team here. And I love that you mentioned therapists, because therapists can be that non-judgmental guide through the process too, because this is not easy. The hardest part is what you've done, which is entering the workforce, building a new life, re-identifying with yourself, and then redesigning who you are. And that accomplishment is far harder than anything else that people will go through in the divorce process. Thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to.
Thank you. Do you have any closing advice that you'd like to offer?
I would say it really and truly, it is a journey. And all of those cliche things, take one step at a time. But truly, in those moments when you feel like you are alone, you're not. There is someone who is in your sphere that has either gone through it themselves or has a family member that's gone through it themselves. Just reach out to them. All it takes is a phone call and to say, I'm having a bad day. And I think one piece of really important advice, maybe two, is your journey is going to look different than your friend's journey, than your sister's journey, than everyone else's journey. There are unique pieces to your journey that in the end will create something very, very beautiful. I promise you. I promise you. And I think the other piece of advice is to just give yourself grace along the way, a very, very healthy dose of grace along the way. You're new here, right? Like, this is something, whether it's, your first divorce, even if you've been through divorce before, it's not going to be the same as the last time. And so just give yourself grace along the way and keep taking one step at the beginning of every day.
Christy, thank you so much.
Thank you
for being here. I would like to just share your contact information for anyone who might have further questions, who might want to meet you, who might have a house to sell or a house to buy, or questions to ask about the journey that you have been on and theirs. And I so appreciate that you've joined us today and that you have shared with us. So we did share your information with Keller Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you for providing this inspirational and deeply moving conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope it's been helpful. It has been helpful to me, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Truly our pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.